you can't make alcohol above a certain proof, but there's no one telling you can't, have as many shots as you'd like, right? I mean, you can't technically serve someone who's inebriated in a bar. So, I mean, these kind of things are going to come up. There's an interesting question the other day actually came up, said, well, what about an on-premise consumption lounge? What's going to happen for a bud tender? Are they going to have to get certified to say, okay, you're too high? This is the Empire State of Cannabis. Welcome to another episode of Empire State of Cannabis. Today we got a very special guest, Ron Silver. He's a world-renowned chef, owner of Bubby's Restaurant in Manhattan, founder and chief creative officer of Azuca. Ron, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk all about edibles. We're going to talk about edibles, what edibles are, what it means in the CBD hemp extract space, also what it means in the adult use space, and what it's going to mean in New York. So, Ron, why don't you give us a little background about yourself and what Azuca is all about?
So, I have been a chef. I've been working in kitchens all my life, but I've owned Bubby's in New York, and we have a bunch of restaurants in Japan also since 1990. So this is our 30th anniversary. And since I've been in restaurants and in kitchens all my life, I've also really used cannabis all my life. And at a certain point, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, when there was going to be something like a cannabis industry, I started sort of talking to people who were busy exploring what that looked like. And I sort of understood the biggest problem to be a low dose, controllable edible. And that problem, whoever solved that problem was really going to be solving the biggest problem in cannabis edibles, which really, really since the beginning, I've assumed it was going to be at least half of the cannabis consumption, whether it's CBD or THC. Just an enormous amount of people, especially people who've never used cannabis, I think have an aversion to smoking. And especially for elderly patients and people who really have the most benefits, elderly women, for example, a controllable dose is the key to being able to both take it and enjoy it, and also take it and have it be an effective, useful medicine. So really ever since, this is the thing that I've been focused on from day one. I can go into what the problems are in edibles, but the solutions that we've been able to come up with, both the present ones that we're in the market with, and our other innovations that we're going to be coming out with, are, each one is sort of more, industry setting than the next in a way.
Well, I think it's interesting, though, when you talk about, some cannabis consumers, they're having aversion to flower. And so, but also kind of what I'm hearing, though, is edibles expand the market and expand the total addressable market, right? Because if you're a classic cannabis consumer, flower is kind of that classic. I mean, everything about flower. So I feel like it's doing two things, right? I mean, it's kind of expanding for a regular cannabis consumer, ways to use cannabis, right? So maybe edibles is part of a routine. Maybe that's your weekend routine as compared to your weekday or whatever, right? But what you're saying is almost like you're thinking it's expanding the potential market, the total addressable potential market for cannabis to people that really don't want to smoke something, right?
Well, yes, and there are an enormous amount of people who, for example, people who are, undergoing chemotherapy or post-surgery, or really elderly women face a huge amount of challenges. And a lot of the current medical solution is to just dish out opioids. whereas the cannabis actually is a lot more effective and causes many less problems or really no problems. So, and, just for example, in New York State really, since they're the last ones on the bus, they want to be the best ones on the bus. And the idea of a consumption lounge is really addressed by a controllable dosed edible, something that you can have a drink or an edible snack that's 2 or 3 milligrams, so that you know really how much you're having and that you can have a few of them and be fine.
Well, you can't smoke anything inside anyways, though. You know what I mean?
That's a discussion. I personally feel that a cannabis lounge without smoking is just dumb.
It's boring.
I don't think it's going to happen. But they can certainly have a smoking area and a non-smoking area and stuff like that. But there are many things to flesh out for real.
Yeah.
And, I personally feel that pandering to the sort of loud and yet small crowd is not going to be the way to go. Just don't go there if you don't like smoke.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So that'll be interesting. I mean, I think what you'll probably end up having is some sort of concession where, you have a non-smoking area, but probably like an outside or like semi-outside area for smoking, But that's interesting because you're saying like, with edibles, you can control the dose a lot better, right? So
not with traditional edibles, but with a program that allows you to control the dose, which is something that we have.
Yeah, because most people, they're going to say, well, my experience is I ate a brownie and I was gone for 2 days. Right? I hear that all the time. Edibles made me stop consuming cannabis. And it's like, well, you had a bad edible. But I mean, what are some of from a scientific perspective, from a formulation perspective, why is that?
Well, it really is about the nature of oil and cannabis oil. And really, if you've ever seen it, and most of, if you've ever seen what's in a vape pen, that's basically cannabis oil, and that is what they make edibles with. So that oil is obviously, if you poured that into a glass of water, it would float on top in a little blob. And so when it goes into your body, it's also in a little glob. And those molecules really stick together. So each individual cannabis molecule is 1.5 nanometers. And so most edibles companies just take some sort of cannabis extract, whether it's oil or kief or whatever, and put it into their, say, gummy bear. And so when that goes into your body, it's in various sizes of globules that have to go into your liver to be processed. And depending on liver function, that could take anywhere from 1 to 4 hours to get anywhere from 2 to 6%. So there is another technology called nanolipid technology, which is sort of an emulsification program that will get a smaller particle size or a more controlled particle size, and that could be anywhere from, say, 100 to 1,000 nanometers, or say 800 molecules big. And with that, there's a lot of variability. One of the variables is that if you have a tight emulsification, you can't put a lot of medicine in there. And it also doesn't taste that good. And if you have more medicine in there, it has a sort of not a very good taste, and it also loses a lot of shelf stability. So there are many, many problems involved with how to get the cannabis into the gummy bear. And a lot of the problems involve waste in manufacturing, waste in shelf returns from things falling apart on the shelf through temperature fluctuations that make the emulsification fall apart. And then from the consumer side, a sort of unpredictable experience. And so what Azuca has is something called time infusion, which is thermodynamic individual molecular encapsulation. And that our encapsulation wraps one molecule at a time. It only works on a singular molecular basis. And so there's a few things about it, is that because it's not an emulsification, it's a thermodynamic bond. So because of the nature of that bonding setup, it has a lot more flexibility of temperature. So it can go up to really 300 degrees or down to 50 below zero and still maintain its bond. So so on the shelf return for manufacturers, that's helpful. It also cuts manufacturing waste by almost 100%. And for the consumer, it makes it so they can decide almost to the milligram how much they want to consume.
Well, so that raises an interesting question, almost like a conundrum for regulators, though, right? Because if you have a product that is utilizing technology that you're talking about, right, you're going to have a lot more exact dosing. So 20 milligram product that Azuca makes is going to be consequentially different in terms of the consumer experience than 20 milligrams of another product. So when we're talking about it from a regulatory perspective, when we look at New York, they just rolled out all CBD, or hemp extract cannabinoid products that have food or drinks can be up to 25 milligrams per unit. But a 25 milligram per unit product that does not take into account some of these issues that you're talking about, much different than a 25 milligram product, say, that utilizes some of the technology you just described. So from a regulator perspective, what is that? I mean, I'm trying to think, what is that? What does that really mean? I mean, can you require some sort of, I don't know.
To me, it's the difference between a dial-up internet and a broadband internet.
Yeah.
Or it's also the difference between having a car with a seatbelt or not having a seatbelt. And it's also the difference just between having an actual solution in hand, because the industry right now does not have, it's not aware of this solution. Although we are getting out into the marketplace now, and for example, with our first customer, Wana, I don't know if I'm allowed to say exactly what it was, but the amount of sales that we did with them last year, or represented for them, is enormous, and we really ended up doing, accounting for like 30% of their gummy sales, and it really was sort of additive rather than sort of capitalizing on their other.
It's just because people had a better experience with those products and they came back and bought them again, basically. I mean, that's everything.
A lot of, and that's we launched at the beginning of the pandemic, and so we really didn't have a chance to market this stuff. It was really word of mouth, and it really does work. So as people, as consumers and manufacturers become aware of an actual solution, then it becomes, from a regulator standpoint, you can't insist on something that's not possible.
Yeah.
So this just makes it possible, and I think that there will be a lot of competition going towards this way as it develops.
Well, do you think there should be a cap at all on milligrams of cannabinoids in a single product or a single dose? I mean, how do you even come up with that cap, right? So would you say, okay, this is how many? I mean, 25 milligrams almost seems super arbitrary, right? And then in Colorado, it's 100 milligrams for an edible product. If
CBD or THC.
Well, I guess that's an interesting question, because either one, right? I mean, obviously THC is psychoactive, CBD isn't. You have these other cannabinoids. So do you create different rules for different cannabinoids, or do you just draw the line at psychoactive and non-psychoactive?
Well, I mean, I think part of the answer, in my mind, part of the answer is that the regulations have not permitted a lot of research, and so everybody's flying by the seat of their pants. So it will be interesting to understand what that means. I feel like a 25 milligram dose of CBD is, a decent average dose, but I really have no idea. I just know from anecdotal evidence that
Yeah.
it does have an effect on people. And that does seem to be a decent dose for a lot of things, but I really don't know.
And it's person to person. I mean, I guess when you look at THC now, there's a decent comp to alcohol. Not a good comparison, but there's a somewhat of a comparison to alcohol, right? So you can't make alcohol above a certain proof, but there's no one telling you can't, have as many shots as you'd like, right? I mean, you can't technically serve someone who's inebriated in a bar. So, I mean, these kind of things are going to come up. There's an interesting question the other day actually came up, said, well, what about an on-premise consumption lounge? What's going to happen for a bud tender? Are they going to have to get certified to say, okay, you're too high, you're not able to be served? Are they going to put some caps on the amount of, product that can be served to a person? And, at what point do we just say, well, different people are looking for different things? I mean, this is interesting, the intersection of science, research, and cannabis. I mean, when I was in high school, I worked as a dishwasher, right? And I mean, listen, there's nothing, I mean, everyone in the kitchen smokes pot. That's just what happens, right? Are these people in the kitchen smoking pot necessarily because they're trying to get an exact metered dose, et cetera? For me as a dishwasher, I was trying to get as high as I can before I can't do my job anymore, so I can forget about the fact that I'm washing dishes all night long. You know what I mean? So it's per person. It's completely different, and so it's a tough job for regulators at all. And I wonder if honestly, when we look at New York, the regulators, I don't think it's going to happen, but maybe they should take a step back, let the kind of market evolve a little bit. And if there's a problem, address it instead of, trying to be proactive about addressing problems that don't really exist. I mean, no one's ever overdosed on THC, to my knowledge.
It does seem, like the kind of thing that has an automatic regulation in it all by itself. Nobody's ever died from it. And I don't know how many bong hits somebody can take before they sort of threw up or sort of coughed themselves to sleep.
Yeah.
I just, of course, one of the problems really is if somebody eats too many edibles and it is a bad feeling.
Yeah.
So I guess the worst that we're talking about is somebody having a bad feeling.
Yeah. Well, what do you have? Maureen Dowd. I mean, the famous story of Maureen Dowd, right, from the New York Times. I'm talking about where she went to Colorado and she described her experience, and it was one of the most ridiculous things. I mean, it's parodied.
An entire candy bar that was like 100 milligrams or something.
Yeah, yeah. And so, I mean, there's something where you just can't replace consumer education, right? I mean, well, at what point does he say a regulator? I mean, you just got to be sensible about things. But that's part of the problem. And so you bring this up, this kind of quick acting, fast acting, is that you can eat an edible. It doesn't kick in. Well, after you ate an edible, maybe you smoked took a couple hits off a joint and maybe took a dab. Maybe you had another edible. And then all of a sudden it kicks in and you're in another world. But what are really the consequences of that? I mean, listen, we basically let adults figure out their tolerance for alcohol.
I was just going to say, nobody ever, when they legalized alcohol after Prohibition, it was like, the confetti went up. And, I'm sure there were many people, throwing up in the street.
Yeah.
And, up until, up until the 70s, they encouraged people to drink and smoke at the same time while they were driving.
Yeah. 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 And that's the thing. Like, everyone has that story about when they're in college or when they're in high school, when they're younger. Oh, I drank half a bottle of UV vodka, right? And I'll never do that again. Okay. Well, and so now they find they're so that's the thing with cannabis. I mean, we talk about legalizing for adult use. At a certain point, we got to just treat people like adults and say, okay, figure it out. I mean, obviously you don't want operators kind of taking advantage and overcharging, but listen, I mean,
the thing about it is there has to be a way. A lot of the regulation is a way to generate revenues.
Yeah.
And for whatever it's worth, and I mean, I am kind of a dork or a geek or whatever you want to say, but in 1842, Abraham Lincoln gave a speech. That's 18 years before he was the president, about Prohibition. It is a long, long speech. It's like 40 pages long about how any prohibition is a tax on the poor.
Yep.
And because everybody else can just do whatever they want, and it's just straight up tax on the poor. And in this case, it was a regulation or a law. It is turned into not only a tax on the poor, but also a way of generating slave labor in the prison system by having a regulation that really is only applied to a very small group of people.
Oh yeah, well, and that's the crazy thing. I mean, interestingly enough, you look at legalization in New York, and I think a new poll came out, it's like 66% of New Yorkers support legalization. But you look at the suburbs, look at Westchester and Long Island, and that support it's kind of minority. It's like 48%, 45%, right? And my quick reaction to that is, well, they have no problem getting pot. And they're never going to get arrested for smoking cannabis in Westchester and Long Island. A lot of these voters, right? They're never going to get arrested. I mean, obviously, there's parts of Westchester and Long Island that is, problem areas in terms of enforcement and disadvantaged communities. But a lot of these voters, a lot of these, middle class, upper middle class, upper class,
Yeah, they
white
don't want
people.
dispensaries in their neighborhood.
Yeah, they don't want to dispense it. Well, they're scared. Listen, it's fear mongering. They don't want to dispense in the neighborhood because they don't have a dispenser in the neighborhood and they don't realize how benign that is. They don't mind having a liquor store in the neighborhood because it's convenience, right? So I think it's really it's fear mongering. I mean, when you look at what the PTA does and what some of these law enforcement organizations come out with, it's just ridiculous. I mean, smart approaches to marijuana, right? I mean, they've lost their arguments in almost every state. They're doubling down here in New York, and it's like, oh, everyone should be scared because the use is going to increase. Everyone's going to be on the road high, as if they aren't already, and all these things are
the
going to happen.
entire country.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I mean, the other thing is that the state and the city and the Fed, they all need the tax revenues. I mean, there's and to spend the money on enforcement rather than generating revenues through taxes is just dumb. Especially in New York City, I believe that the cannabis consumption per capita is more than anywhere in the United States.
It is. No, absolutely. It's going to be well. So let's talk about that. So let's assume Cuomo and the legislature get their shit together. It's past April 1st. We see some sort of marketplace set up by 2022. I've always said, don't make a comparison to any other place because New York, first off, we already have a thriving cannabis industry. We made cannabis cool here in New York, right? I mean, honestly, and it's going to look so much different. And I think what's really interesting is the culture around food. I mean, it's an open secret that if you want to have a good time on a Friday, Saturday night, maybe before COVID, right, you go and get tickets to an infused dinner, right? And so what does that really look? I mean, what do you think that looks like? I mean, you're down, I know your restaurant is down in Soho, right? Pretty lively place. But what does that look like in Soho, the LES, whatever, these cool spots and, parks, cool spots in New York City in terms of cannabis? I mean, do you think food has a big role in that? I mean, I think so.
It's a very interesting question. So we're in Tribeca, and one of the very, I think interesting things that's come out of this COVID situation is the outside cafe life that has emerged, and I don't think that's going to go away.
No.
So, in other words, we have tables out into the street, and where we did not have that before. So, and everybody has it. So there is a cafe lifestyle that did not exist before, and at the moment we're still in the middle of this pandemic, and it's worse than ever. Yep. But there's a vaccine, and there seems to be some solutions coming along with some more sane period leadership.
Yeah.
And so it seems like we could be sailing into a moment where in New York City, we have a brand new cafe culture with a different way of approaching food and beverage. And I could go into that all day long.
Interesting.
But one of the things that I will say is that the New York City Health Department, their number one job is not to make sure that things are healthy, but to generate revenue for the city. So the thing that does is it makes a whole bunch of stupid laws that make it so you can't do things that they do in other places like Paris or Spain. or Barcelona, or what I'm saying, like little grilled street foods, or
Yeah.
cheese sitting out, or hams hanging up, or a million things that you might be able to do, or grill some stuff outside. So I think that we're in for a more, I want to say, sort of a more hospitality oriented street life.
Yeah.
And, I personally, and at the moment you could really buy cocktails and be walking around with it. I would like to see just a sort of, I mean, I personally would rather sell forms of cannabis at my bar than alcohol any day. I would,
Yeah.
I would forego all alcohol sales.
Wow, that's interesting.
To sell cannabis stuff. And I don't like alcohol. I find it to be destructive.
Yeah. But it's been so normalized. You know what I mean?
I don't want. I'm not like trying to sort of prohibit alcohol. I'm just saying, for me personally, if I had to choose between the two, I would choose to sell weed all day long, because it's just more friendly.
And it's a lot easier. So you're saying basically, I mean, if instead of, what happens, right? So the waiter comes to your table and says, "Are you would you like a drink? Are you drinking tonight?" Right? So you get a drink, you order your apps, you order your food. Well, maybe it's, are you consuming cannabis tonight? So that could be a THC beverage, that could be THC food, or if we're talking about it, I mean, if the outside environment stays, which I think is interesting, you say that, because people. I mean, rooftop bars and lounges were taking off before the pandemic. People wanted to be outside. Now we know people want to be outside. People have to be outside. And so if New York City continues to allow this, which they absolutely should, and allows this kind of, hang out outside, why not bring a joint to the table as you look over the menu, right? And beyond the economic benefits of, increased appetite in a restaurant, you're probably going to get more of a longer experience, more engaged experience from the customer at that place.
Well, I think that there is at the moment a more there's a slowed down mentality in the restaurant in general. Like, people are accustomed at this very moment in time to waiting longer for their stuff to come out, because things are just running in a wonky way.
Yeah.
I would say that the whole slowing down is conducive also to cannabis, and to sort of just opening up the thinking from this sort of fake Puritan point of view that really is just fraught with all kinds of, a lot of them valid, a lot of the social justice stuff. I really do feel that stuff needs to be represented in these regulations, and especially, expunging and getting rid of all of these records, but creating opportunities for people.
Well, that the opportunities thing is important, because I say this all the time. When tax revenues are, or whatever, you can bring tax revenues. We've been spending money on, certain, trying to remedy harms in these communities for years. What we need to do is create pathways for ownership, to create wealth, right? And I think the way to do that, open it up. If you're New York State, you want serious tax revenue, open it up. Allow people to apply for. Listen, there's no competitive nature to getting an alcohol license. Yet we don't have people going, "Oh, we don't, we have too much alcohol." You let the market settle it, right? You let people get a license. Let people get a license for on-premise consumption, for retail, for cultivation, and let the market do its job. I mean, if any place is ripe to do that, it's New York.
Honestly, I also feel that if that were the environment, I feel that, let's say that all the laws and stigmas are gone. I feel that New York could really innovate on cannabis. I mean, what we're doing is innovative, and I'm not that smart. There's a lot of smarter people than I am out there to figure out all the different problems, and some of those problems have to do with accounting and legal and inventory control and distribution and all kinds of stuff. So
all kinds of stuff.
There's just an entire industry to flesh out and to figure out
Yeah.
insurance and just all the dry details of the business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I say this all the time. I mean, you're not going to find a more innovative population than, the 20 square miles or so of New York City, right? I mean, and New York in general. I mean, people forget upstate New York. I mean, we still have that New Yorker flavor. We're just a little slower with things, right? But, we still have that mindset up here in upstate New York, all throughout New York State. So, I mean, listen, New York
there's
State.
plenty of good agricultural land up there. There's a lot of things to do up there.
Well, I'll tell you, there's good cannabis growers up here too, and they've been growing cannabis for decades. So you know what I mean?
I've smoked a lot of it.
Exactly. So, I mean, either way, you have entrepreneurs. And this is the thing. I mean, I don't care what any MSO, what any large CEO, private equity backed company is going to come in and say, and that, well, we need responsible operators. I come from the CPG industry, whatever. Yeah, there's responsible entrepreneurs. It's just that we told them they've been illegal and they've been doing illegal things for the past 30 years. And so they've been innovating, getting around the law, but still running a business. They're running a business. They're entrepreneurs. Bring those people, allow them to get licenses. It's a no-brainer, in my opinion.
Well, I don't disagree with that. I do think that there needs to be a level of professionalism in the cannabis industry because there are a lot of things. For example, laboratories and the sort of safety of making sure that there are no pesticides and fungus and mold and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So I think that, and that brings up sort of responsible growing, and there's a lot of waste involved with growing, and there's a lot of chemicals and as far as fertilizers, and so there are definitely things that need to be regulated and considered, and it is capital intensive, and it's not an easy thing. And so one of the things also that I think, to your point about creating opportunity, is that one of the cheapest assets in the world as the industry is emerging is mentorship.
Yeah.
That's free.
Yeah.
So basically, it seems like there could be the intention of, sort of leadership / mentorship / building a sort of an interesting industry that is not just about being cutthroat, but about being also about being helpful. I mean, I don't like cutthroat at all personally.
Yeah.
Although I do like to innovate the coolest thing possible.
Yeah.
Like that.
Well, I think the state could have a role in that too, because I think that the conversation gets lost when the state talks about revenues. I think that the greatest potential for tax revenue is not in the tax on cannabis at the point of sale, but it's the payroll taxes and it's all the other revenue that's going to be generated by having a thriving industry, right? I think that eventually dwarfs whatever sales revenue, tax on point of sale. So if the state was smart, when we talk about reinvestment, they should reinvest in education, helping entrepreneurs, this mentorship. We talk about incubators. It's kind of a broad concept, but, low interest or no interest loans, waiving some of the fees to apply, making it easier, right? Because like you said, you got to have the regulations. You have to have the guide rails, right? And you have those, and those are inherently expensive. But what you don't need is you don't need $100,000 license fee. You know what I mean? Or not for everyone, at least. And you can give some tax breaks here and there. If New York looks at this as a longer term way, just like they did with craft beverage, right? A craft alcohol beverage. You look at this 5-10 years down the line. Well, if you have 1,000 businesses that are licensees being supported by another 5,000 businesses helping them run their business, supported by tens and tens of thousands of employees, well, the economic benefit and the tax benefit there is pretty substantial. It's more than $1 billion, that's for sure.
Well, I agree with that. And they can also bang it at the point of sale too. So they get a cherry on top and all of that stuff is right. And the better job we do, the more interesting it's going to be. And the more sort of interesting they make it, the more people will come here to do it. And I do think that there's synergy in these conversations and trying to really forge a business that has integrity and is a sort of representative of a new, a new era with that it seems like we're going to be going into.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, Ron, thanks so much for joining the conversation. How can the viewers, how can people listen? How can they find you? What is it? LinkedIn, website, Facebook?
I have a LinkedIn page, Ron Silver or Azuca, and we have a website, azuca.co.
Azuka.co. Okay, cool. Instagram? Where can people check you out on Instagram?
I think we have an Instagram. Yeah. Azuca.
Cool. I think it's still book reservations at Bubby's, right? You guys are still going strong. So
Yep.
Excellent. All right, cool. Well, check Ron out. Fascinating conversation. We're going to be hearing from you again, Ron. And this is going to be fun in New York. And I look forward to visiting your restaurant. And I can order a joint. I can order some food. I can order a beverage, whatever I can order.
Well, let me know when you're coming down. We can feed you and then we'll take a walk. And
Excellent. I love it. All right, Ron. Thank you so much. Another episode of Empire State of Cannabis. Like, subscribe, check us out. We've got more coming every few weeks. Thank you.
Thank you.